If you've ever stood in front of your garden bed in July, sweat dripping down your forehead, wondering why you're spending your retirement watering the same plants every single week, this video is going to change everything for you. I'm John Sam, and over the past 15 years of helping seniors reclaim their gardens, I've learned something pretty profound. The most beautiful yards aren't the ones that demand constant attention. They're the ones where you plant something once, step back, and watch it multiply in strength and color every single year without you breaking your back to maintain it. That's the magic of perennials done right. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Perennials sound complicated. They sound like you need a green thumb, a gardening degree, and a lifetime subscription to plant magazines. But here's what I've discovered. There are 8 plants, 8 specific varieties, that completely shatter that myth. These aren't fussy plants that need perfect conditions. These are the quiet achievers of the garden world. They thrive on neglect, burst back bigger each season, and ask very little in return. The best part? Many of you can plant these right now, in June, and by next spring, you'll already be seeing the payoff. So if you're serious about building a garden that works for you, instead of the other way around, subscribe to this channel and keep watching. Understanding why these 8 plants are different. Before we get into the specifics, I want you to understand the fundamental difference between plants that drain your time and energy versus plants that genuinely reward you for planting them. Most perennials, the ones you've probably killed before, are actually pretty demanding. They want a very specific pH in the soil. They need precise watering schedules. They get diseases if you water them at the wrong time of day. They sulk if the humidity isn't just right. And frankly, if you're a person who forgot to water your houseplants 3 times this year, that's not going to work. The 8 plants we're covering in this video are fundamentally different. They're what I call resilient repeaters, plants that actually strengthen over time rather than weakening. They're the plants that your grandmother had in her garden, the ones that seem to thrive whether she watered them or not. There's a reason those plants became classics. They work. What makes them work is this. They have deep root systems that find water on their own. They've evolved to handle poor soil conditions. They're naturally resistant to the pests and diseases that plague other plants. And here's the kicker. They actually produce better flowers and fuller growth in their second, third, and fourth years than they do in their first year. That's not common. Most plants reach their peak and plateau. These ones keep getting better. Perennial number 1, the hosta, your secret weapon for shaded areas. Let's start with a plant that might seem boring until you realize just how much power it holds. The hosta. I get letters from viewers all the time saying the same thing. John, I have this shaded corner of my yard and nothing will grow there. Invariably, I write back the same thing. Plant a hosta. Hostas are the answer to the gardening problem that nobody talks about but everybody has. If your yard has trees that throw shade across parts of your garden, if you have a north-facing wall, or if you've got areas that only get 2 or 3 hours of sun, hostas are what you plant. And here's why they're so remarkable. They don't just survive in shade, they actually prefer it. They thrive in conditions where most flowering plants would sulk and eventually die. Now, hostas come in an enormous range of sizes and leaf patterns. Some varieties grow just 8 inches tall, perfect for edging a shaded walkway. Others reach 4 or 5 feet, which is great if you need to create height and structure in a dim corner. The foliage ranges from solid green to variegated patterns with white or cream stripes. Some have blue-tinted leaves, some are golden. The point is, you're not forced to plant the same hosta everyone else does. Here's what happens over time with hostas that makes them special. They divide. Each year, the plant expands. After 2 or 3 seasons, a single hosta becomes a network of multiple crowns. At that point, you can literally dig it up in early spring, split it into several sections with a spade or sharp knife, and plant those divisions elsewhere in your garden. Suddenly, one plant becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. I've had viewers who planted a single hosta 15 years ago and now have an entire hosta border that they created by dividing that original plant. The other thing hostas do, and this is something that appeals to me personally because I'm not interested in babysitting plants, is that they don't spread aggressively. They don't send runners underground to pop up where you don't want them. They don't self-seed everywhere. They just occupy their space with quiet dignity, looking beautiful year after year. In terms of care, Hostas need decent soil that drains well. Soggy ground in winter will kill them, but otherwise, they're remarkably forgiving. Once established, you water them during dry spells. And that's really it. They don't need fertilizing if your soil is halfway decent. Pests largely ignore them. Diseases are rare. If you're planting hostas in June, here's what I recommend. Get them in the ground early in the month, before the real heat sets in. Water them consistently for the first 2 weeks to help them establish. Then you can back off. By next spring, they'll have sent down a strong root system and will be genuinely self-sufficient. Perennial number 2. Coneflowers, the pollinator's dream that grows more vibrant every year. Now let's talk about a plant that brings something entirely different to the garden: coneflowers. If you plant a coneflower this June, here's what will happen. It'll produce flowers for you by late July. Those flowers will be absolutely swarmed by bees, butterflies, and occasionally hummingbirds. The plant will keep flowering right through August, September, and often into October. But here's the part that matters for next year. Once the flowers fade, they turn into these sculptural seed heads. Some gardeners deadhead those seeds. I don't. I leave them standing because they're genuinely attractive through the fall and winter. And they also feed the birds. Then next spring, something remarkable happens. The plant comes back, and it comes back bigger. More flower stems, fuller growth, more flowers. In year 3, it's even more impressive. In year 4, you've got a plant that's absolutely dominant in your garden. Coneflowers are native to North America, which means they've evolved to handle the weather, the pests, and the soil conditions of this continent without much fussing. They're drought-tolerant once established. They're not picky about soil. They're happy in full sun, but they'll tolerate partial shade. They come in purple, pink, white, orange, and yellow. Some have double flowers. Some are single-petaled. The height range is interesting too. Some varieties stay around 2 feet tall. Others, if they're very happy, can reach 5 feet. That tallness isn't a weakness. It's actually a feature if you know how to use it. Tall coneflowers should go in the back of your garden bed, so they don't shade out shorter plants. They can also be thinned when they're young. If you have a cluster of stems emerging, you can remove every other one, and the remaining stems will put all that energy into bigger, more robust flowers. For June planting, the same rule applies. Get them in early and water them consistently through the establishment period. By midsummer, they should already be producing flowers. Understanding soil and spacing, the foundation that makes everything else work. I want to pause here and address something that's critical to the success of all 8 of these plants, because it's something I see people get wrong constantly. Most of these perennials, the coneflowers, the salvias, the geraniums we'll get to, they do better in soil that's not rich. I know that sounds backwards. You've probably been told your whole life to add compost and enrich your soil, and there's a place for that. But these plants actually perform better in leaner conditions. Rich soil makes them grow too fast, too soft, and they get floppy. Lean soil makes them stronger. Here's what I do. When I'm planting these perennials, I either plant them in the existing soil with minimal amendment, or I'll add some perlite or sand to the soil to make it lighter and grittier. That's it. No fancy potting soil mix. No bags of expensive compost. The second thing that matters is spacing. These plants get bigger every year. People plant them too close together, and by year 3, they're crowding each other out. When you read the spacing on the plant tag, consider going a little wider than that recommendation. That hosta might say, space 18 inches apart, but I might space them 24 inches apart because I know they're going to fill in. Same with coneflowers. The plant might say 12 to 18 inches, but I'll go 18 to 24. You'll have an ugly sparse garden in year 1, but by year 3, it'll look filled in and lush without being overcrowded. Perennial number 3. Geum, totally tangerine, the underrated powerhouse. Here's a plant that most gardeners don't even know about. And that's a shame because it's genuinely one of the easiest, longest blooming perennials available. Geum totally tangerine produces these impossibly bright orange apricot flowers on short stems, usually around 12 to 18 inches tall. It starts blooming in late spring and just keeps going. Through June, July, August, into September. It's like someone designed a plant specifically to provide continuous color all summer long. The foliage is interesting too, kind of low and ferny, with a texture that makes it attractive even when it's not blooming. And unlike some perennials that bloom once and then sit there looking boring, the rest of the year, Geum is attractive even when you're not looking at the flowers. Here's where this plant really shines. It absolutely does not care about soil quality. I've planted it in clay. I've planted it in sandy soil. I've planted it in rocky, poor soil. It thrives in all of it. Once established, it's drought-tolerant. It's resistant to pests. It doesn't require staking or support. It doesn't need fertilizing. It's basically the set-it-and-forget-it plant. In June, when you're planting this, give it decent watering for a few weeks. By August, it should be absolutely covered in flowers. Next year, it'll be even more vigorous. In fact, one thing I've noticed with Geum is that it actually seems to like being slightly underfed. The plants that perform best for me are the ones that I ignore the most. Perennial number 4. Russian sage. Architecture and movement in your garden. Russian sage is a plant that solves a problem you might not even realize you have: the need for vertical elements and movement in your garden. Most perennials have a static presence. They bloom, they look good, then they stop. Russian sage is different. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall, sometimes taller if it's particularly happy, and it's covered in tiny, airy flowers that seem to float above the foliage like a haze. The whole plant has this ethereal, wispy quality that brings movement and lightness to a garden that might otherwise feel heavy. The foliage is also attractive. Even without the flowers, Russian sage has silvery green leaves that contrast beautifully with the darker foliage of other plants. And here's the thing that really appeals to me. After the flowers fade, the plant doesn't fall apart. The stems stay upright. The seed heads are attractive. You can leave it standing through the fall and winter, and it actually looks good. It provides structure and interest when a lot of other plants are sleeping. In terms of care, Russian sage is about as low maintenance as it gets. It wants full sun and well-draining soil. In fact, it actually prefers lean soil and dry conditions. If you plant it in rich, moist soil, it gets floppy and weak. But in a drier spot, with average soil, it becomes this strong, architectural presence. For June planting, Russian sage is a solid choice. It establishes quickly and will put on a good show by late summer. The key is giving it full sun, at least 6 hours, ideally 8 or more. Perennial number 5. Hellebore, the plant that blooms when everything else is sleeping. Most gardeners spend half the year looking out at a dormant gray garden. Their plants are sleeping, nothing is blooming, the garden feels dead. Then there's the hellebore, which seems to operate on an entirely different calendar. Hellebores bloom in winter, not late winter when spring is already peeking out, but in the actual dead of winter. Depending on your climate, you might see flowers in December, January, or February. If you're in a milder zone, they'll bloom in winter. If you're in a colder area, they'll bloom in early spring. Either way, you're getting flowers when you need them most, when everything else is bleak and gray. The flowers themselves are remarkable. They come in an enormous range of colors: white, pink, red, purple, green, burgundy, sometimes with speckled or spotted centers. The flowers have this quiet elegance that's different from the bold blooms of summer. They're intricate and detailed, the kind of flower that demands to be looked at closely. Here's what surprised me when I first planted hellebores. They're actually evergreen. The foliage persists through winter, so even without flowers, they're providing structure and greenery when everything else has died back. Once spring arrives and other plants start waking up, the hellebore flowers fade, but the foliage is still there, still attractive. Hellebores want dappled shade and well-draining soil. The worst thing you can do is plant them in wet, soggy ground. If your soil is heavy clay that stays wet, you need to either amend it significantly with sand and perlite or choose a different plant. But if you can give them good drainage and shade, they'll reward you for decades. I have hellebores in my garden that are 12 years old and still blooming reliably every winter. In June, you might find hellebore plants at the nursery, but they won't bloom until winter. That's actually fine. Plant them in their spot where they'll stay. Water them regularly to establish, and next winter you'll have flowers. Perennial number 6. Arkansas Blue Star, the plant that changes colors with the seasons. Here's a plant that most people haven't heard of, but it deserves to be widely planted because it essentially gives you 2 different plants in the space of one. Arkansas Blue Star starts the season with feathery green foliage that looks fresh and airy. Then, in late spring and early summer, it produces these delicate blue flowers that have a soft, romantic quality. They're not showy flowers. They won't stop you in your tracks, but they're charming and they attract pollinators. Then something unexpected happens. As summer progresses and temperatures drop in fall, the entire plant changes color. The foliage turns this brilliant golden yellow. It's like someone flipped a switch. A plant that was cool and blue becomes warm and glowing. That color persistence extends deep into fall, so you get an extended period of visual interest. The other thing the Arkansas Blue Star does is establish a deep root system. Once it's been in the ground for a couple of years, it becomes genuinely drought-tolerant. You can plant it in a difficult spot, maybe an area of your garden that tends to dry out, or maybe a spot that's generally neglected, and it will thrive. Arkansas Blue Stars don't get very tall, usually staying around 2 to 3 feet. It's not prone to disease. Deer tend to leave it alone. It's happy in full sun, though it'll tolerate partial shade. For June planting, this is a solid option. It'll establish well through the summer, and by next fall, you'll see that remarkable color change. Perennial number 7. Lavender, the plant that rewards you with fragrance and function. Lavender is interesting because it's not just beautiful and low maintenance, it's also genuinely useful. It's fragrant, which means every time you pass it, you get this olfactory reward that makes your garden feel like a nicer place to be. The flowers are also exceptional for cutting. You can cut them for fresh bouquets or dry them for use throughout the year. But here's what makes lavender special in the context of this list. It's one of the most drought-tolerant plants you can grow. Once established, it actually does better with less water rather than more. I know gardeners who practically ignore their lavender, watering it just a handful of times a year, and it's absolutely thriving. Lavender wants full sun and well-draining soil. If your soil is heavy and wet, add sand and perlite to lighten it up. The plant produces these spiky flower clusters in purple, pink, or white, depending on the variety. The silvery green foliage is attractive even when it's not blooming. One of the best things you can do with established lavender is trim it back lightly after it finishes blooming. This keeps it compact and bushy, and it often triggers a second flush of flowers in late summer. If you don't trim it, it'll keep growing and get larger, which is fine if that's what you want, but it might get sparse in the center as it ages. For June planting, lavender is excellent. Get it established with regular watering through July, and by August, it'll start producing flowers. By next year, you'll have a mature plant that's genuinely self-sufficient. Perennial number 8. Geranium Rozanne, the nonstop bloomer. Our final plant is genuinely one of the most impressive perennials I've ever grown. Geranium Rozanne is a hardy geranium. Not the tender annual geranium you might be thinking of, but a completely different plant. This plant produces flowers from late spring right through to the first hard frost. If you live in a mild climate, you might get flowers from May through December. That's 7 months of continuous blooms on a single plant. The flowers are bright blue-purple, which is a color that many perennials don't offer. They're small, delicate flowers, but they're produced in such abundance that the entire plant is essentially covered in bloom. The foliage is low and mounding, creating a dense, bushy plant that's attractive even without flowers. What makes Geranium Rozanne even more remarkable is its growth habit. It doesn't stay in a compact mound. It spreads and rambles. It can sprawl across the ground, or you can actually train it to climb. If you let it grow near a low shrub, it'll climb up the sides and create this stunning effect where you have blue geranium flowers cascading over the green foliage of another plant. Geranium Rozanne is happy in full sun, but will also tolerate partial shade. It's not particular about soil. It's not bothered by pests. It doesn't need staking or support. It's just relentlessly vigorous and generous with its flowers. In June, when you plant this, give it consistent water to establish. By midsummer, it should already be blooming. And next year, you'll have a much larger, even more floriferous plant. Your June planting plan, making this happen right now. If you're watching this in June and thinking, I want to do this, here's your action plan. First, understand that planting perennials in June is actually advantageous, not a disadvantage. They have all of summer and early fall to establish before winter. They'll send down strong root systems. By next spring, They're already past that critical first-year phase. Second, prepare your soil before planting. Do a simple test. Dig a hole about a foot deep and fill it with water. If the water drains within an hour, your drainage is good. If it sits there for hours, you need to amend with sand, perlite, or composted bark to improve drainage. Third, space these plants with the understanding that they'll get bigger. Err on the side of wider spacing. That sparse-looking garden in June will look full and mature by next year. Fourth, water consistently for the first month after planting. Aim for soil that's moist but not soggy. After that first month, you can start reducing watering frequency, and most of these plants will be significantly more self-sufficient. Fifth, don't fertilize. Seriously, these plants don't need it. In fact, fertilizer often makes them weaker. And finally, by the time next spring rolls around, you'll already be seeing the payoff. These plants are going to come back stronger, fuller, and more vigorous than they were when you planted them. That's the magic of perennials, done right. Why this approach to gardening actually works for seniors. I want to come back to something I mentioned at the beginning, the idea that your garden should work for you, not against you. As we get older, our physical capacity changes. Bending down to weed every week becomes harder. Hauling bags of soil becomes more difficult. Watering on a regular schedule requires memory and energy that we might not have. That's not a failure on our part. It's just reality. But here's the gift of perennials. They're designed for exactly this situation. You plant them once, you establish them properly, then they take care of themselves. Yes, you'll do some maintenance, maybe some light deadheading, maybe cutting them back in spring. But it's not the constant daily attention that annual flowers demand. I've had hundreds of viewers tell me that switching to a perennial-based garden completely changed their relationship with gardening. Instead of feeling like an obligation, it became a joy. Instead of being exhausted by upkeep, they were just enjoying the beauty of watching something thrive without constant intervention. If you've ever felt like gardening wasn't for you because it seemed too demanding, I want to challenge that. Gardening absolutely can be for you. You just need to choose the right plants and set them up correctly the first time. These 8 plants, the Hostas, coneflowers, Geum, Russian sage, Hellebores, Arkansas blue star, Lavender, and Geranium Rozanne, represent something bigger than just a list of things to plant. They represent a philosophy, a way of gardening that respects your time, your physical capacity, and your desire for beauty. They're plants that strengthen over time. They're plants that ask for less and give more each year. They're plants that turn a garden from a source of stress into a source of genuine joy. If you plant these now, in June, you're making an investment that'll pay dividends for years. Next June, you'll be standing in a garden that's dramatically more beautiful than it was this year. Your plants will be bigger, fuller, more vibrant, and the amount of work you've put in, minimal. That's what I want for every viewer of this channel, a garden that works for you. A garden that rewards you for planting it once and then stepping back. A garden that gets better, not harder, as time goes on. If this video was helpful, please consider subscribing. Hit that like button. If you've got questions about any of these plants or your specific gardening situation, drop a comment down below. I read them and I responded. And if you know someone in your life who could benefit from a simpler, easier approach to gardening, please share this video with them. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.